Hello everyone. Today's topic is going to be quite an interesting one as we'll be discussing the use of commas or in particular the overuse of commas. So an universal tip that most of us would have followed is using or inserting a comma wherever we naturally tend to pause. So is this a correct technique? Yes, to a certain degree it is, but then this technique can get quite tricky. So, the ideal or the best approach to decide as to whether the content that you have written requires the insertion of a comma is to ensure that you use the comma for its fundamental function, that is, as a separator. But the question here arises is whether how do you decide or how do you come to a conclusion as to where a separation is required or where the insertion of comma is required. So this is where we come across comma rules. So there are ideally certain rules following which you can decide whether that particular sentence would require a comma or not. So we'll look at those rules first and then discuss them individually. So the first rule is separating complete ideas with the use of comma. Next is the separation of descriptive phrases with the commas. Next is adjacent items being separated through commas. And finally, we have transition words being separated with commas. So let's look at the first one, separating complete ideas with the use of comma. So in this case, each part of the sentence or each part that is being separated by a comma is a complete sentence in its own way. So, but then because of the association, the writer may decide to make use of conjunctions to link the two sentences. Conjunctions such as and or but can ideally be used to associate or link two particular complete sentences. So let's look at an example for this. Digital recording measures the nuclear magnetic signal and this allows for a precise reading. So if you can look at the sentence here, we use a comma before and the two parts of the sentence are independent in its own way. So the part before the comma is a complete sentence and the part that follows the conjunction and has a subject and verb and is also complete in its own way. But just because they're associated or linked with each other, we make use of a comma to show the relevance of the sentence. Moving to the next rule, that is use of commas in descriptive phrases. So this kind involves separation of words or phrases that describe each other. So if we consider an example here, all the developing nations agreed, making the possibility a reality. So if you look at the second part of the sentence that follows the comma, making the possibility a reality, this is nothing but a subordinate. So even though it adds contextual information or contextual meaning to the primary sentence before the comma, even if deleted, the original sentence or the primary sentence would not lose its significance. So even if you write all the developing nations agreed, it would hold some value even if we do not have the part that's mentioned after the comma. So even in such cases, that is when you come across this particular rule, so removing a phrase after the comma does not destroy the meaning or the impact of the primary sentence. Let's look at the third rule here, that is insertion of commas when we are talking about adjacent items. So these items are nothing but which have parallel relationship with each other but still different in meaning. So we can understand this better through an example. This approach increases worker independence, decreases time consumption, and creates an information environment. So if you see here, we are talking about three different items that are related to the approach but yet different in meaning. So in this case, the approach has three distinct impacts that are being separated with the use of commas. The last rule is using commas for transition words. So this is where you add viewpoints to your content. So usually transition words are nothing but therefore, thus, however, nevertheless, also. So these are some of the transition words. So for instance, we have an example here. It can be conveniently prepared, comma, however, comma, by the oxidation of red phosphorus. So this is how you see that we can use a comma before and after transition word, that is to show some form of emphasis or to add your viewpoint to the content. So these being the rules, let's look at some of the tips to prevent comma overuse. So there are certain scenarios where we can avoid the use of comma, but yes, unless they do not apply to the previous rule stated. So you can avoid a comma in the following cases, that is between a subject and verb in a sentence, after any number, before any preposition, and before or after any conjunction. So these are the overview of the tips that can prevent your comma overuse. And lastly, the final tip that can ensure that the piece of work created by you is free of comma overuse is to reread your work. So reread your work after you finish writing, reread it just focusing on the application and use of comma. So this summarizes the use of commas, or in particular the overuse of commas. So if you found the content informative, please do like the video and also subscribe for future informative videos. Thank you.